This is Senator John Kavanagh joining us today. He is representing LD3. He spent 9 years on two separate town councils, 19 years in the Arizona Legislature, both in the House and Senate. He's now the Senate Majority Leader. That kind of surprised us all. He was a police officer for 20 years. He retired as a detective sergeant. Previous full-time at both ASU and Scottsdale Community College. He still serves as an adjunct at both, and he has his PhD in criminal justice. Did I hit all the major points?
You did, absolutely.
Great. So he has written an owner's manual for us. This right here is the State Legislature and Owner's Manual. And I'll say I also do another podcast. So I read maybe about 3 books a month that I review. And I really enjoyed this one, and I'm not just saying this. Like I could have used this as a reporter now entering into a second career. Last year when I was lost, when I was wondering what a strike everything was, I could have used this book. So thank you for writing this.
Sure.
And you mentioned in the book that you wrote it not just for your students, but tell everyone who else you hope that will pick up this book.
Well, in way of history, I'm also on the approach committee, and I've usually been approach chair. And the president of ASU, Michael Crow, was in my office, probably begging for money, as all of the state officials do. And I casually mentioned that I always wanted to teach a course on state legislatures, because again, my experience on town councils, 2 separate town councils and the state legislature. And I also have a master's degree in public administration and government. Because my other teaching was all criminal justice, obviously. And he said, sure. Now, when I was a criminal justice professor, the first thing I would do if I had to do a new course, like on probation or something, I would get the introductory textbook for that area. Because most topics have introductory textbooks. They're all the same. History, structure, operations, ethics, blah, blah, blah. There was none for state legislatures. So I had to research all that information to give it to my students. So after I got all the data, I worked on it a little bit more, and I basically put it into a book on Amazon. And it wound up being like almost 400 pages. I mean, because every time I'd research a topic in depth, some other issue would come up. I said, well, that's a good thing to have in there. And then I'd add that in there. So it just got totally expanded. But what's nice about it is it also has the informal aspects of the state legislature. So I've got the formal, which is what you got when you were a kid and went to the Capitol, that little cartoon with the trail of how a bill becomes law, right? And that's true to a degree, but I have the informal processes there too. So not only is it helpful for a legislator, I mean, most new legislators spend the first year trying to find the restrooms. You read this and you literally walk in with like 8 years of experience, and you won't make stupid mistakes, like not knowing, what a motion to reconsider is and stuff like that. I mean, you'll come in like a pro, or at least you can talk like a pro, right? But again, not only for legislators, staff members, interns, pages benefit. Anybody who lobbies the legislature, who needs to know how it operates formally and informally, how to communicate. I have a whole chapter on communicating with legislators. Not that we speak a foreign language, but we have to be handled with tender, loving care and a lot of butt kissing. But a reporter covering the legislature needs to know all of these things. Lobbyists, reporters, staff members, or interested citizens who are activists. And I even tell the lobbyists, I say, and actually I'm trying to sell my book, but I say to the lobbyists, buy extra copies, give them to your clients so they see how hard it is to pass a bill, and they'll pay you more. So anybody interested in politics, this helps. And by the way, if you're interested in Congress, to a certain degree, this also helps, because state legislatures, well, Congress was modeled after the state legislatures, right? The state legislatures created Congress. A lot of similarities in the process. Chapter on how bills are written, how the courts interpret them, ethics. I have like a whole chapter on jargon. Because even if you have no idea what you're doing, if you know a few good jargon words, you can fake it. So if you want to go right to the end of my book and do the jargon, you can fake a whole career out of it at the same time.
Now, I will tell you, you talked about the ethics, and that is the last chapter. And there was an abrupt kind of tone when you hit that because it was almost like you were talking directly to the legislators or the future legislators, where the beginning of the book, it seemed like it was more maybe for those trying to figure out, da, da, da. But here it was like, okay, this is the ethics. This is what we should do. Did I pick that up correctly?
Yeah, and I think that's because really we are the focus of the ethics laws. I mean, everyone needs to know how a bill, becomes law. Everybody needs to know how to communicate. Everyone needs to know, the backgrounds of legislators and staff. But ethics is something that we are held to, and we are held, and we are punished for if we kind of mess it up. So, yeah,
Yeah.
and it's also kind of nerdy, and most normal people who are not political wonks like us probably don't like the nerdy stuff.
One quirky thing that I learned from reading it is why the bills are read aloud. And and it's speed reading. I mean, they speed through them, and I'm like, why do we have to do this every time? And it's because you say that, the original legislators were mostly illiterate, so they
Right.
had to be read aloud.
Yeah, in the beginning, go back to 1912, the agrarian and mining and cattle, Arizona. A lot of these people were ranchers and farmers, and they couldn't read. So every bill, every amendment was read by a reader to them aloud. Now we keep the tradition semi alive. We just have to read the bill and the short title. Uh,
Hmm.
but even the short titles are actually long. So, and when you're reading like 20, 30 bills because you're doing a first or second read, which if you don't know, buy my book, you'll know what the first and second read is. Uh, it's kind of a tradition that we keep. But it's very important to first and second read bills and make it known because the first reading the bill and the second reading is what's done before the third read where we vote on it. And first and second reads give people a heads up that there's a bill coming down the pike that they're either going to want to support or they're going to hate and want to come down and testify against.
Right, right. Okay, let's talk term limits a little bit. So my
Uh,
question is, do you think Arizona should revamp its term limit policy? And you said in the book, you said every legislator is potentially termed out when they run for reelection. But you said by that reasoning also, this also prevents good legislators and those with experience from still being there. So what do
yes.
you think? What is your personal
Well,
opinion?
first of all, I want to make it clear that the reason why, I was saying different things, everything in this book is balanced. This
Yes.
is not, this is a totally nonpartisan, non-issue negative book. When I was young, I went to NYU back in the 60s. I had professors who were like politically left leaning and they would push their agendas. And I didn't like that. So, all through my teaching career, I was always totally neutral, giving both sides of an argument. And I do that here too. But obviously, I don't like term limits because what it does is first it tells the voters, even if you want this person, you can't have them stay any longer. It throws out experienced people who, by the way, often have built bridges to the other side of the partisan divide. It removes people who have institutional knowledge. I mean, a lot of these bills were tried before and were dismal failures, and people forget and bring them back like 15 years later and like, hey, we tried that. It's horrible. And again, I run for re-election every 2 years, so I can be thrown out then. Those are the real term limits. So I'm not a big fan of term limits. But by the way, I've been here. You may say, well, if Arizona has an 8-year term limit, Senator Kavanaugh, how are you there 20 years? And the answer is the people who write term limits, because they're not a great idea, in my opinion, aren't that bright. So in Arizona, they said you can't spend 8 consecutive years in a single chamber. So every time you leave the chamber, you reset your termometer, so to speak. So I spent 8 years in the House. I was termed out. So I switched to the Senate and reset my termometer. I was 4 years in the Senate when one of the House reps in my district was termed out. Had I stayed in the Senate, I would have had a primary against her, costing me money, and maybe I would have lost. So instead, we swapped, and I ran for the House seat again. She ran for the Senate. Then I was there for 4 years. An opportunity came to go back to the Senate. I went back to the Senate. So I've been going back and forth. for like almost 20 years now. And I call myself, and this is a little politically incorrect, but the Democrats still laugh at it. I call myself trans-chambered, and my preferred pronouns are sen and rep.
And there is workarounds, or do you have to sit out 2 years if you wanted to just come back to the Senate, or do you have to sit out a year?
Yeah, you could sit out a term,
Right.
but if I sat out a term, I'd have to go home. And I've been here like almost 20 years. So I've got this honeydew list that is so long that like I just can't do that. I have to stay here.
Gotcha, gotcha. Okay, let's talk about AI. So you write in the book that you anticipate having to, in the future, write about AI, and it's too early right now to really see the effect that it's going to have. But Arizona is one of the early adopters of this deep fakes law that you guys passed. Can you talk a little bit about that bill that passed?
Yeah. Well, when I was talking about AI in the legislature, I wasn't so much talking about efforts to regulate it. I was
Mm,
talking about us using it for researching bills, writing summaries, writing bills. Uh,
okay.
and when I first wrote the book, that was kind of an issue because AI was like hallucinating and doing strange things, but that's happening less and less. And just recently, I was thinking about doing a bill on a certain topic, right? So for the heck of it, I opened up ChatGTP and I said, pretend you're a lawyer. And by the way, when you use AI, it's always good to cue it and tell it what you want it to be. So you go,
Mm,
pretend you're a lawyer and write me a bill uh, a state law that has these bullet points. And I just gave 5 or 6 different concepts that I wanted in the bill. Within 2 minutes, I was shocked. It came up with a perfectly written bill. In fact, there was only one word that was a little nebulous, and I changed it. And I gave that bill to our legislative council, not saying that it came from AI. And they just said, yeah, it's fine. We'll put it through. Now,
wow.
there can be, I mean, these have to be checked. And I would always double check it through an attorney. But I was shocked at, oh, by the way, after it gave me that generic law, because it knows I'm in Arizona legislature from previous queries, it said, would you like me to rewrite this in the format to be introduced as an Arizona bill? Blew me away. So,
Now, I do know there is at least one legislator, and he does use AI as an ADA accommodation. And he clearly writes, in the correspondence when he emails you back that this has been written, by AI. So I'm sure that this is something that you guys are going to see coming up pretty soon.
yeah, but understand there are gradations of AI. If you're using a program like Grammarly, which corrects your grammar and punctuation, that's AI. So that's semi AI. So it's one thing to write something and have them do a grammar correction, which I don't think you have to tell people about, right? It's another thing to say, pretend you're a legislator trying to con a constituent and say, then I think you probably want to say, this is a con letter that I had AI do for me. Yeah.
Right, right. Okay, let's talk single shotting. So I'm up in LD 23, and this is how we got Michelle Pena as our legislator because we single shot. Is it a good idea, especially in areas, say if you're a Republican in blue areas, to maybe single shot a moderate? Is that a good idea?
Well, first so your listeners know,
Yes, please.
in Arizona, each we have 30 legislative districts. Each district has one senator but 2 reps, and those reps represent the whole district. We don't divide the district into half and have one in each. So you got 2 people. So you have 2 seats that people can run for. Now, one party can strategically ensure that if there's 2 seats open and it's a Republican leaning district, that only one Democrat runs for the seat. And then they tell all the Democrats and all independents who they think lean a little Democrat to only vote for that one person. Don't cast your second vote in that district, because the first vote is for the person that they want. If they cast a second vote, it might wind up going to the person who winds up beating that favored single shot candidate. I think it's strategic, but I don't think it's democratic because you're gaming the system.
And it's something that is really difficult to explain to people. And to
Yeah,
your credit, I think you did a good job in the book explaining that whole rationale. But even for experienced political people, it's still something they struggle,
yeah.
understanding.
And I think a lot of voters feel offended because they're almost saying, so you're asking me to give up one of my votes and make me less. And so I think in a way it kind of hurts some. I think the only people who actually agree to do single shots are the party base, the activists who are heavily engaged and very committed ideologically. And if they're Republican, way more right than the rest of the Republicans, Democrat, way more left than the base is really they control the primaries, which is why you have such. That's why there are no moderates left in the Arizona legislature. They have all been purged over the last 6 years.
So I was going to mention that because I did read where you said that, and I was shocked. I was shocked when you said that. And I guess it depends on what your view of a moderate is.
Let me rephrase it a little bit. There may still be a few moderates, but they will not vote that way and they will not speak that way because they will be primaried out. There are
True.
people who are just more liberal and more Democrat. When I first came in, and we're going back to 2006, right? You probably like in what were you in elementary school? So I was one of the more conservative members. I have not changed my positions. I have a lot more Republicans to my right than I did before, and the same is true of the Democrats.
Okay, now I understand. So something recently in the news that was just last week, I think it was a school board. If it wasn't a school board, it was a city council, but they just voted that you can only have public comment on items that are actually on the agenda. I was shocked that I saw this in your book to, talk about that. Can you talk a little bit about the difference between, when the public's going to go and they're going to be expecting during their public time to talk about anything?
All right. Well, there's two types of comments. As you said, a council might have 8 or 9 agenda items, a zoning item, a road construction. There's public comment for each individual item. You can only talk about that item, right? Some councils have what's called call to the public, which is a section set aside where anybody can come up and talk about any subject. Now, one of the problems with it, of course, is that the council members are not allowed to reply to what the person says because the open meetings law, see, this gets really tangled. The open meeting law says that council members cannot discuss an item that has not been put on the agenda. So people interested can be there to talk and comment on it. So if somebody brought up something during call to the public, and the council was allowed to debate and comment on it, they violated the open meeting law by talking about something which could come before a vote in the future without letting everybody know. So they have to just sit there and listen. And so that's one of the limitations of call to the public. Now, what happened in Fountain Hills, which is where they're thinking about getting rid of it, is the call to the public was politicized. An organized group that doesn't like the current council majority which is now Republican, even though it's a nonpartisan, right? Their activists were coming in and they were using the call to the public just to attack. And the council members didn't especially like that. So they said, why are we giving these people, a stage to just come in here and bash us? So that's why I think they've suspended it indefinitely. But that's the story behind that.
Well, hopefully that's not going to be a current trend because we could say the same thing with the Board of Supervisors meetings, which gets heavily charged. And I hope I'm not giving away too much with your book, but one last thing I will say is I think it
100
was
pages, there's plenty left to
I think
hide.
it was so interesting. You were like, you can tell how much they really want to hear from the public based on when they put the public comment. If they put it in the front, it's
Yeah,
like they really want to hear from you. But I've been in meetings and most of the time it's all the way at the end. And it's kind of
yeah.
like, okay, who's going to sit through it all?
There's a lot of strategy behind that. And yeah, if you put it at the end, I think it violates, is it the 10th Amendment? What's the amendment against cruel and unusual punishment? You would literally make people sit through 12 agenda items, some of them boring staff reports on zoning matters before they would get to talk to you. So that's one of the I'll tell you one. I don't know if I put this in the book or not, but I'll tell you one other situation. When I was on town council, there was a controversial issue, and we expected a lot of people to come out and kind of attack the position that the council had taken. So the town manager was initially going to have only 1/4 of the ballroom in the community center because there's petitions. He was going to have 1/4 of it for the meeting, and then somebody else said to him, "No, no, no, open up all 4 quarters." He says, "But that'll be so much bigger than the number of people coming." And the person said, and this is politics at its worst or best. He said, "What do you want the newspaper to say? The council was attacked by a crowded room full of constituents, or an empty room full of constituents commented against the council?" So there's a lot of games that are played in politics. So
That was very smart. Okay, let's talk a little bit about redistricting. So I didn't know this. I learned this new. Arizona has an independent redistricting committee. You hear a lot about break up Maricopa, right? Like Maricopa
uh,
should be broken up. Do you think that will ever happen?
no, it was a state senator who pushed that. Uh, it's probably not philosophically a bad idea because Maricopa County is over half the state. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's a pretty big county. So it probably would be a good idea to divide it. Here's the problem. It's like in a divorce. How do you divide the assets? Who gets what buildings? Who gets what trucks? Does the county which winds up with Phoenix get almost all the buildings and courthouses and everybody else gets nothing? I mean, it would be a logistical nightmare to do something like that. But it wouldn't be a bad idea because it's probably too big to be a county.
Yeah, the other one I was thinking of is CD7. I mean, who drew the lines for CD7? I mean, it literally goes Maricopa, Pima, Pinal, all the way
Oh yeah,
from Tucson down to Yuma.
yeah. Well, part of the reason it's big is because most of it has nobody in it. It's just all empty rural area, right? We got a lot of that in Arizona. But one of the problems that you have is that the redistricting commissions have a whole bunch of criteria, and competitiveness is not necessarily at the top, right? The, 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 uh, the big thing that influences the redistricting is the civil rights law requires that you have to have districts where minority candidates have a chance of being elected. Now, historically, minority group members do not vote in the same level, percentage wise, that non minorities do. So, in order to create a district where a minority candidate can win, you have to put extra minority people into that district so they can get the majority to elect their candidate. But when you put extra minority people into District 1, and they're pretty much Democrats, you have all these extra Democrats, I mean, Republicans, right? That
Hmm.
you got to put somewhere. And then you put them in Republican districts, and now you have overpacked Republican districts. And you end up, and the redistricting commission, we're trying to do the best, they were trying to do the decent thing, but we have 30 legislative districts in Arizona. Only five are competitive, where either party could win. The other 25 are so Democrat or so Republican that it's all about the primary election. Once you win the primary, you can go on vacation, in the Caribbean and come back in November and assume your seat. And that's the 5 out of 25 are actually competitive, which is unfortunate, but that's the reality. My district, right? I used to have 2/3 of Scottsdale and Fountain Hills, right? Two redistricting later, I now have the upper third of Scottsdale. I slither across Phoenix. I go to Cave Creek, Carefree, Anthem, and New River. It takes me an hour to go from my house to the end of my district, and I live in the most populated area in the whole state. And they did that because they needed to try to make one of those districts that are competitive. I think it's LD4 to
Hmm.
make that competitive. And so they had to jiggle around and create these 1950 Mississippi racially gerrymandered Rorschach test districts to accomplish a good goal, but nevertheless, it creates weird districts.
So they have a tough job.
Yeah, probably an impossible job.
Okay, so another subject I definitely wanted to hit was how members of the legislature are punished. So we may or may not see an impeachment, but let's say we don't see an impeachment when you guys come back into session. What are the ways that legislators could be punished for, their conduct?
Well, again, beyond being recalled, as you said, we control internal punishment. Uh, by a two-thirds vote, you can expel somebody, and you really got to do something pretty bad to do that. And we only had two recently, Liz Harris, and then it was Don Shooter. And Don Shooter would not have been ejected had he not just refused to stand up and say, I'm sorry. He was given the option and he didn't do it. But other than that, so that means that it has to be really something off the wall to get removed by the legislature by a two-thirds vote, which means it becomes a majority vote, which very often winds up under partisan lines. Now, the speaker or the Senate president or the speaker, they can do their own discipline. They can remove members from committees. They can, give them an inconvenient parking space. Even further than the remote designated smoking areas that we banished our smokers to. They can give them a horrible office. So they can do those kind of small things. But yeah, but we have a lot of characters in the legislature. And one of the reasons is that we have no bosses. We get elected every 2 years and we have no boss to discipline us. We have no boss to worry about. So you get people who just do and say, really wild things. It's, I guess democracy demands it, obviously, but it does create some interesting characters. And if you're a reporter, some great stories.
It certainly does. Okay, my last question or my last subject area is clean elections. So we saw last session with Senator Rogers' photo radar bill that a chunk of each ticket that the person gets goes towards clean elections. Again, I'm going to ask you your personal. They can read the book if they want to kind of know how it works a little more. But your personal opinion, are you a fan of clean elections?
Uh, I truly have mixed feelings about that. And I say that because I think it's a horrible idea to have public money, even though it's dirty speeding fine money, right? I think it's a terrible idea to have government funds funding political campaigns, right? But were it not for clean elections, I would not be here. The first time I ran in 2005, right, there were 6 candidates. My only prior experience was on the Fountain Hills Town Council, and I was running. There were like 5 or 6 of us in the race. Michelle Reagan was the incumbent. She was going to win. I mean, 90% of the time, incumbents win. Plus, she could do good fundraising. She had money. She was an incumbent. The race was hers. One of the other candidates was a medical doctor from Scottsdale who worked for the hospital. He had raised over $100,000. I looked at his campaign report. Like, this radiological company, this medical testing lab. He had like doctors up the whatever anatomical part you want, giving him. So Michelle Reagan had over 100 grand. He had over 100 grand at the time. Clean elections had matching funds, where once I got my $255 donations to make me a clean election candidate, they matched whatever the other people. So I wound up with $100,000 too. That's the only reason I was able to compete in that race. So if it wasn't for clean elections, I wouldn't be here. Since then, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled matching funds unconstitutional because essentially it eliminates or avoids the First Amendment power of a donation that a private candidate makes. So now clean elections candidates get like $20,000 in the primary, and which really isn't going to do much in an election, quite frankly. So I'm ambivalent. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for them. But by the same token, I philosophically don't like the idea of public funds being spent. But since they're not giving an outrageous amount, I'm not going to raise any big stink over it.
Right. But for state races, they do get, especially the Corporation
Yes,
Commission, they get a
yes,
significant amount. So there's that little caveat there.
that is, yeah, and almost all of them. In fact, it's so significant that they almost all run clean. So yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Okay,
Of
let's
course,
close
keep
with
in mind there's something else in the mix too: independent expenditures. Independent expenditures make
oh,
what I spend or what anybody spends, if it's a close race or a special race, they totally swamp the candidates' donations and control. And many of these independent expenditures are coming from out-of-state groups, and these are both Republican and Democrat independents. So that's another thing that totally shakes up the whole election.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, let's end with talking about lobbyists. So I am not of the opinion that lobbyists is, you know, an automatic bad thing, right? I don't believe that all lobbyists are bad. Um, you go into great depths in the book about lobbyists. People can read that. Government liaisons, I think, might be a different story. Do you believe that tax dollars should be spent lobbying the legislature?
All right. Well, first of all, lobbyist is not a four-letter word, right? It's an eight-letter word. But lobbyists, be they government lobbyists or private lobbyists, right? They serve the valuable function of giving legislators information. And a professional lobbyist will be able to, number one, give you the information concisely. I mean, you sit down with a non-lobbyist and it'll be like 10 minutes before they actually get to a point that's useful. A lobbyist knows that he or she has a limited time frame and it's like bullet points. And a really good lobbyist will tell you, by the way, this is what the other side will tell you, and this is why it's wrong. So understand, legislators are not really legislators. We are jurors in a courtroom. We listen to testimony, and instead of voting guilty or not guilty, we vote yes or no. So information is important. I think it's also important to get information from government agencies. Now, we can ban we can ban government agencies hiring private lobbyists. But what they'll do then is they'll simply have their own employees lobbyists. So and or they'll find a professional lobbyist and make that person an employee. So then instead of giving that person maybe a flat fee of $20,000 to lobby for the year, it'll be a salary $70,000 a year employee getting a state pension, and it'll be like way more expensive. So it might sound like a noble idea, but like many noble ideas, it probably will backfire tremendously on us.
Okay.
Unintended negative consequences are one of the major outputs of the state legislature, and that would be one such unintended negative consequence.
And I think that's a good point why we may need to throw out term limits because that nuanced view can probably only be gotten because you've been there for so long and you have the experience on how they'll just wiggle around the rules.
Absolutely, yeah. And by the way, something else you didn't mention is it wouldn't be a bad idea to give us a livable salary because right now, the only people who can be in this legislature are people in very unique financial situations. I mean, I was a professor at a community college that was more than happy to see me as a state legislature. So I was able to do all of my courses in the spring when we were in session online. I mean, now I'm retired, I can do it also. But if you're not in that situation, if you're not, maybe you own your own business, you're a realtor who wants to get their name out, and you're flexible. If you don't have flexible hours and income to support you, you can't be a state legislature. Ordinary people cannot be represented by ordinary people. That you can't be a state legislature, and that's a
Uh,
big problem.
Unless you're in rural Arizona, and then you kind of get those little perks that.
Little perks. One of the more interesting maneuvers that were performed at the state legislature was changing the rural per diem from originally it was like $65 a day in session or something, and 35, I think, out of session. Somebody had the great idea to run a bill and somehow got Governor Ducey not to sign it, but not to veto it, let it become law by inaction that changed the rural legislators per diem to the federal employee per diem. And that sounded so reasonable on its surface, so innocuous, if I may,
Mm.
until you realize that the federal per diem was for a federal employee going to a conference or a meeting out of state where they were at a hotel and had to buy their meals in restaurants, not for somebody who had relocated in an apartment, maybe they're sharing. So that per diem went from like $65 a day to like $235 a day. So rural legislators, when you take that $24,000 salary and you add their per diem, a lot of them are clocking $75,000, $80,000 a year. So as I say in the book, California, here we come.
Thank you so much for letting me review your book and joining us. Go buy the book.
Yes, Amazon.com. And I
Yes.
kept it super cheap for students. It's only $14.95 digital and $19.95 paperback. So buy one for a friend.
Thank you, Senator. It was a pleasure.
My pleasure too. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.